available. But we have Kleinbaum, we have Kuig, and we have Hannon all on the line with me.
Cool. Real quick, Chair.
Sure, go ahead.
Things when there's a blue folder item, so when we get there, there will need to be a motion to receive and file. So, and then also, I learned a bunch of stuff recently. There was some informational meetings about committee liaisons, so I'm feeling my confidence is sky high right now.
I'm feeling the headlock already, so I'll keep it succinct and brief there, Officer Lostrom.
You actually don't have to vote to move on to another item. You can just move on to another item.
Thank you. That will save about 5 or 10 minutes of time.
Yeah, I thought that would be nice. Okay, meeting is called to order. Sorry.
No problem. Go for a roll call.
Here we go. I put my stuff backwards. Let me just switch it back. Sorry. Okay. Commissioner Hannon.
Here.
Commissioner Koenig.
Here.
Commissioner Marinelli is absent at this time. Commissioner Gupta, he sent an absence. Commissioner Gall.
Here.
Commissioner Kleinbaum.
Here.
And Commissioner Gittens, also absent. Okay. You may proceed, Chair.
Let's all do a Pledge of Allegiance. And ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great, thank you. All right, so Officer Lostrom and Commission approve the order of agenda. Can I get a motion?
I'll make that motion.
I second the motion.
All right, roll call or all in favor? Which one will work? You're muted.
Sorry, that was embarrassing. Obviously, a little overconfident here. Commissioner, sorry, 1 second. Roll call vote for the approval of the order of agenda. Commissioner Hannon.
Aye.
Commissioner Koenig.
Aye.
Commissioner Kleinbaum.
Aye.
And Commissioner Gall.
All right.
So approved.
Great. Do we need to approve the blue item now, or should we pursue?
You'll proceed to the blue folder items, and there will need to be a motion to receive and file.
Okay, I'll do that now.
As instructed.
Great. Yes. May I hear a motion for the approval of the blue folder items?
I motion for approval of the blue folder items.
Second.
Motion by Kleinbaum, seconded by Koenig. And a vote goes Commissioner Hannon.
Aye.
Commissioner Koenig.
Aye.
Commissioner Kleinbaum.
Aye.
And Commissioner Gall.
Aye.
Motion received and filed.
Great. So we should go to the blue folder item first, or should we go to the consent calendar?
That's going to be under discuss. The blue folder item received and filed under J1. So you'll proceed with that once we get to J1.
Thank you.
Item. So you can move on to the consent calendar.
Great.
This has the affidavit of posting.
Okay. So the consent calendar is business items except those formally noticed for public hearing or discussion are assigned to the consent calendar. The commission members may request that any consent calendar item be removed, discussed, and act upon separately. Items removed from the consent calendar will be taken up under the excluded consent calendar section below. Those items remaining on the consent calendar will be approved in one motion following oral communications. So I guess I would hear a motion to approve the consent calendar. Does anybody want, any commissioners want an item below to be moved or delayed or discussed, etc.?
I'll make a movement that remains in the same order and we proceed.
Do I hear a second?
I second that.
Second.
Motion to approve, seconded by Kleinbaum. Commissioner Hannon,
Yes. Aye.
Commissioner Koenig,
Aye.
Commissioner Kleinbaum,
Aye.
and Commissioner Gall.
Aye.
There we go. Proceed, Chair.
All righty. F1, affidavit of posting. Officer Lofstrom, please clarify this deliverable.
That's our consent calendar, and it's been approved.
Gotcha.
That
Gotcha.
affidavit of posting's been approved.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. Item G, excluded consent calendar items. And I don't, none.
No items.
Okay, carry on. Okay, so I'll read this boilerplate here on public participation on non-agenda items. This section is intended to provide members of the public with the opportunity to comment on any subject that does not appear on this agenda for action. This section will be limited to 30 minutes. Each speaker will be afforded 3 minutes to address the commission. Each speaker will be permitted to speak only once. Written requests, if any, will be considered first under this section. Any takers there?
None present and no e-comments.
Thank you. So may I close public participation?
You can.
I make that motion.
Thank
I
you.
second the motion.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's me.
That's okay.
We're going to close public participation.
Correct.
Commissioner Hannon,
Aye.
Commissioner Koenig,
I don't know what happened. Aye, sorry, I'm on mute.
Commissioner Kleinbaum,
Agree.
and Commissioner Gall.
Yes.
Excellent. You can proceed, Chair.
Thank you. Items continued from previous agendas.
At this time,
Not at this time. So we don't need to close it out, or do I need to hear a motion to close?
nope, you can proceed with each item as it comes up.
Okay, let's go to J1 then. So items for discussion prior to action. So J1 is public meeting to discuss the city's update to draft safety element, state required general plan element. The city's safety element is a state required general plan element that identifies potential natural and human created hazards that could affect the city of Redondo Beach, city's residents, businesses, visitors, and services. Staff recommends the Public Safety Commission, 1, review, consider, discuss, and make recommendations on the city's draft safety element. And I guess I would hand that mic over to Kyle and Sean.
Well, that would be Sean. He's the.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chair. It's a privilege to be here before the Public Safety Commission again. I don't know if any of you were on the commission when I was here. Gosh, it was 2019, I want to say, bringing the local hazard mitigation plan. So, and I also want to thank everybody for having this special meeting tonight for this item. So I really appreciate you working with your calendars and making this happen. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and bring up about a 22-page slide deck to walk you through a real high-level summary of the document, and then really get into the goals and policies that are proposed within the draft safety element. So hang on here, and I'll go ahead and share the screen. Here. There we go. Okay. All right. Can everybody see that all right? Yeah. Okay. So the item before you tonight is the City of Redondo Beach's draft safety element. This slide here is basically our script for tonight. As you stated in your opening, Chair, what we're asking of the Public Safety Commission tonight is to receive any public input. We have noticed this. We did notice it in the newspaper as well as on the city's website that we had this meeting tonight. And then as a body, review and discuss and provide comments, certainly ask any questions as well. And then ultimately your recommendation on the draft general plan safety element. So I'll walk through on a couple of slides that is the background, serve as background and a general overview of the element. We'll go through the state requirements real briefly, the general purpose of the safety element, a real brief summary of what's in the safety element, and then quickly, kind of really walk through a couple of the, how the safety element relates to some other documents, public safety documents, as well as to the other elements of the city's general plan. And then we'll put up the goals and policies that are in this draft safety element, which is that's really the focus of the meeting tonight. And then I'll have a slide on what the next steps for the draft safety element are. So a little background and overview. It's a state required element of the general plan, the safety element. It's one of 7 required safety elements. We've got land use element, circulation element, noise element, open space element, conservation element, and then the housing element, which some of you may be aware, we've been working on a lot of these elements, particularly the housing element over the last few months. And then this next bullet is about kind of why we're doing this, why we're updating the safety element. Our existing safety element was adopted back in 1993. So it's pretty old. A general plan's shelf life is about 20 years. We're at 30 years now. So it's definitely time to update it. Plus, there's been a number of changes in state law regarding safety elements. And our element doesn't reflect any of these recent changes in state law. Also, our current safety element includes our noise element, and we wanted to pull that out and have that as a separate element. So that's another reason to update. Also, the safety element now incorporates some recent hazard and safety planning efforts that we've gone through. We talked a little bit about the local hazard mitigation plan. There's also the vulnerability assessment, which really is it's a new requirement. It's largely focused on climate change and some of the potential impacts of climate change. And so those 2 new plans are now referenced in this safety element. And again, it's to address new and emerging hazard conditions, climate change, sea level rise, droughts, wildfires, extreme heat, stuff like that. And then it sets that foundation for the long-term resilience of the city, how we deal with these disasters when they do come, and how we bounce back more quickly and avoid some of the impacts that we might have from some of those disasters. So the purpose of the safety element, again, identify and address natural and human-caused hazards existing in and near Redondo Beach. The safety element serves, my screen here is a little bit in the way. Hang on here. The following functions. It develops a framework by which safety considerations are introduced into our land use planning process. So as projects come into the city, we've got to make sure they're all consistent with the goals and policies in our general plan. Now with an updated safety element, this is just which identifies a lot of hazards in the city. This will help facilitate that review process and make sure we don't miss some things. Again, that's kind of what the second bullet talks about. The main element of the document really for our purposes of managing hazards, if you will, going forward are the goals and policies. There's also every policy in a general plan is now required to have an implementation program. We haven't completed those for the safety element yet. We may bring those back to this group. We're not sure yet, but those involve a lot of the other departments, so they have to weigh in on them as we develop those. It also strengthens hazard preparedness planning and post-disaster reconstruction policies. And it identifies how hazards are likely to increase in frequency and intensity due to climate change as we go forward. So the content, this is just one slide on what's in that document. I hope you've had an opportunity to at least get a little bit familiar with it. So it's required by state law to contain 6 sections, and the 6 sections are listed here. There's an emergency preparedness, response and recovery section, geologic and seismic hazards section, flooding and sea level rise section, hazardous materials section, fire hazards section, and then additional climate change hazards. And for each one of these sections, there are goals and policies, and that's what we're going to go through. Just a couple of slides now, kind of what I was alluding to earlier, the relationship of the safety element with these other public health and safety documents like the vulnerability assessment, the local hazard mitigation plan, and I hadn't talked about it yet, but the city's COOP, which is its continuity of operations plan and emergencies operations plan. They all are connected through the safety element. So the safety element kind of drives the development of all these ancillary plans. And then the relationship with other general plan elements. I just noted a few here: the land use element, the open space and conservation element, and the transportation and circulation element. All the elements of the general plan have to be internally consistent with one another. And for example, open space and conservation element, it's interesting as we've gotten in, that's an element we've just completed working on in terms of with our general plan advisory committee. And it identified a few areas like floodplains that also could serve a dual purpose. So that it's a hazard that we've identified, but it also has the potential to serve a dual purpose as, let's say, conservation habitat locations or open spaces for parks, passive parks possibly. So, these documents, these elements work with each other. And then this is Isaac Yang and Isaac's on the call. As we prepared for tonight's meeting, he had gone through the document and had brought a few items to my attention that I wanted to bring up. There's like 2 or 3 of them before we dive into the goals and policies, having to do with some edits that we need to make. And the version that we submitted to you, there's a couple of changes on a couple of pages, and I just wanted to note them. And they've been updated in the PowerPoint that I'm going to go through, as well as our current version on the city's website. But it has to do with page SF4, the continuity of operations plan and emergency operations plan. What you see here is the strike through is the language we changed from the version you have, and then the highlights are added language. So I just wanted to bring it to your attention. And essentially what we did here in this paragraph is just noted that we don't have either one yet, neither a continuity of operations plan or an emergency operations plan. but this element has a policy and a goal to prepare those. So we just wanted to include them here, and we had to clean up the language a little bit. On page SF6, there's a sidebar note in our margins. You'll see these notes, and this was one note that Isaac brought to my attention concerning the two locations of our EOCs. The city has two EOCs, one at the police station at 401 Diamond Street, and a secondary location, excuse me, at the main library. We had noted it was at the fire department station too, but it's actually at the main library, second floor.
Is that Emergency Operations Center?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So we just made that change in the document. Another edit has to do with the first goal and first policy on page SF11. And you can see the strike through here. We had carried over a goal from our open space and conservation element as our goal for safety. And of course that was incorrect. So the highlight is actually the goal for SF1, emergency preparedness, response, and recovery. And we'll go through those in just a minute. And then SF11, that page, policy FS 1.1, we added a little bit of language to that policy. So we added made sure we included the EOP and the COOP, the COOP. And with that, what I wanted to do at this time was throw up each one of the goals with all the policies. I'm not going to read through all these, but we can, get a read from the commission if there's any edits you would propose. And what I could do then is I've got a Word document of the element that I could do some, commenting on, in real time, in case there was something in here you saw you wanted to edit or change or delete or anything to that effect. So I'll just go through this first one. This is goal SF1, emergency preparedness, response, and recovery. And the goal itself is to, I gotta move this. A prepared Redondo Beach that can, and goals, essentially, it's a statement of where we want to be. That's essentially what a goal is. So it reads, a prepared Redondo Beach that can effectively plan for, respond to, and recover from emergencies and hazardous events. And then we have 8 policies that and you can see the underlined on that first policy. That was a little bit of language that we added that was different from the version you guys received. So I'll just pause here and turn it back maybe to the chair to see if you wanted to entertain any motion or essentially it would be, does anybody have any edits, or is everybody okay with these policies and the goal? And if so, we would just move on to the next one.
Let's pause.
Or questions.
Yeah, sure. Let's either pause or hear any questions from any commissioners. I'm going to read through these real quick and invite everybody else to do the same thing. And then after a minute, I'll ask to see if there's any changes or questions. Go ahead and please review.
I have a quick question. We all
Yes.
got this before. So has everybody reviewed this before tonight, or is anybody reading this for the first time? That might speed things up.
So
Sure.
this is kind of a succinct goal list, and I didn't really focus my reading on the goal list. I was more about the natural disasters and their potential effects. So for me, this is somewhat a first time to look through it. I'm just kind of looking through to see if there's anything we can reword or convey better, but it looks pretty good. Does anybody have any edits or changes on this one?
I do not.
Okay.
I don't either. It looks really good, especially 1.3.
I've got a question.
Sure.
Sean, I know that, well, I didn't look at the entire document, so there may be something in there regarding this, but I know that I completed a CERT class of probably 20 years ago, and I think there's several thousand people that also completed a CERT class, and we know that they're there for something that might be catastrophic. It would go out and basically mitigate some of the damage that might happen, or potentially, certainly from a safety standpoint, help with that. Is there any clause in here that talks about the residents, being engaged in mitigation planning?
Not that I'm seeing here. That's not a component of it.
Except for 1.3, the public awareness.
Yeah, that's true. Yes. So it's really about educating the public, not necessarily involving them in the
Yeah,
process.
involving is a good point.
Mhm.
I think that's the reason a lot of us attended this class and became certs. And I think that we expected to be deployed if something catastrophic is happening. It seems like there would be at least a notation in there.
Knowledge of emergency response plan. Yeah, let me think here. Does that seem appropriate in policy SF1.3? Maybe adding some language in there.
Maybe increase and involve the public both in awareness and participation, along with knowledge of emergency response planning and procedures. Something like that. There's probably, yeah.
There would definitely be an engagement, not just an awareness, for sure.
Okay. Increase public awareness and engagement.
You want to specifically refer to it as CERT? I mean, this is I think a nationwide program, by the way. It's not just something in California or locally in our city.
Who managed that on the city side, the training? Was that through our fire department or?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Was it Ben Bernanke? Trying to remember.
Let's see. Let me see here. Okay, track changes. Okay.
Well, I think we have to remember that this is actually just a policy. It's not an implementation of things that are going to happen. So if there is a disaster, I know that you're increasing public awareness and knowledge of the emergency response and planning. And I think if there is a disaster, at some point, we're going to engage and have volunteers help. I mean, as a policy, we don't want to narrow ourselves down. So I don't know. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, it is referring to emergency preparedness, though, and response. I would think they would be, in some cases, next to the firemen and probably called out by the firemen is what we can do to help. But
yeah, well, if there's consensus by this commission, we can add some language to that refers to engaging the public, or potential engagement of the public as part of the public awareness process. Maybe
Isaac could shed some light on that. How would that happen, Isaac, if there something that was catastrophic that did happen in Redondo and it limited your ability to respond? When would you call the CERT organization?
Sure. So relative to the conversation about CERT and how we apply the CERT alumni group with these types of situations, the CERT team training specifically, first and foremost, is being able to take care of yourself your family, and your neighbors. So in that respect, in your home and your immediate block, being able to secure safety, utility control, being able to account for your neighbors, your family, yourselves, that is the first and foremost action and expectation for CERT to be able to be like a localized force to be able to provide that level of response in the immediate space in your neighborhood. Relative to being able to utilize CERT alumni and disaster service workers in a assisting operational capacity, the CERT call out would go through the alumni group. And then we would have staging areas where we would have folks come out and report in. So a staging area for CERT personnel. And then we would then resource people based on ability and capacity to be able to assist, not necessarily in the immediately uncontrolled hazardous area, but certainly to be able to assist in, say, a somewhat evaluated and controlled spaces in a controlled capacity, with a focus also on rehabilitation, administration, and able to assist with logistics. So it's not necessarily putting you into an immediately dangerous to life and health situation, but it is certainly to incorporate you as we can with some degree of safety to be able to help assist responders. That's really how that would roll out.
I guess it probably depend on how catastrophic it is, but I know that we did get training on triage, how to tag people and, where
Right.
they, which says to me that it's pretty close to, you could be in these situations and be front line. So.
Right, absolutely. And I think with that being said, certainly there's a deployment capacity, but also to the point of 1.3, say, for example, if we have 1,000 CERT alumni out there to be able to secure 1,000 blocks, that would be an enormous assistance to be able to triage the city in totality on a profoundly widespread community impact disaster. So again, if we were able to secure ourselves, our family, our neighbors, create a safe space where there's a level of security, and then evolve that moving forward into a more planned response, that's really would be the goal of our deployment of CERT.
Do you think it'd be appropriate to note that on this document or in the document someplace?
So relative to this document and then the evolving emergency operations plan, right, there's going to be some nexus between the safety element in the broad strokes, and then also to the point of emergency operations plan as far as the action component. I would think if it's to the pleasure of the commission to add some language, increase awareness and knowledge, increase public awareness, knowledge, and potential participation in emergency response and plan. I don't want it to make it sound like, because some people might be a little bit apprehensive to being enlisted in. But I think as far as being able to communicate potential response, allows a little latitude in terms of the understanding of choice as an option, as opposed to press to action.
Well, certainly we'd be second, behind the firemen for sure. I mean, we're there to assist you guys, but
Sure, absolutely.
You don't have 5,000 people out there, and
Right.
It might serve you well to have a few thousand people just to help, and they are trained. Besides that, I'd wear my beautiful green helmet. So
Right.
I have that to wear.
Yeah. I think it'd be certainly reasonable to consider language in 1.3 to be able to lead into participation for trained members of the community for sure.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Excellent. Well, I've added a little bit of language to that policy. So it reads, increase public awareness and knowledge of emergency response planning and procedures to include the potential for public engagement.
Did you need us to make a motion on that, or are you just going to go ahead and talk it informally?
Well, I mean, if it's, you could do if you can reach a consensus as a commission, it doesn't have to be a formal motion, but essentially a read from your commissioners if they support adding that to that policy, that'd be plenty.
Maybe we should get to the end of it then and decide if we want to make a motion just to group everything in there, if there's other items.
Sure, let's go to the next page.
Okay. All right, so this is goal SF2, critical facilities. Redondo Beach's essential facilities retain functionality and structural integrity following natural and human-caused disasters. So this is related to the integrity of your infrastructure. And there's a number of policies here.
Do we have any pre-33 critically sensitive structures, or are they all up to date in terms of that? Just kind of a dumb question.
What was it again? What
Pre-33 structures?
1933?
Yeah, that was what I learned in CERT, that those are the buildings you want to get the hell out of. So,
I'm not aware of any of that age other than down in the waterfront area. They're not facilities that are controlled, by us. They're private facilities related to the, and certainly private structures, personal homes,
Gotcha.
commercial businesses, but city facilities, I don't think we have anything in that age range, no.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have questions?
Okay, so we'll move on to the next goal. Hazard and emergency data. Goal SF3, up-to-date hazard and emergency data to ensure effective planning and response to natural and human-caused hazardous events. And then our three policies here to increase or establish a database for this information in GIS. And I know there is a lot more information in our GIS database related to this than we used to have, and they're constantly feeding information as layers of data in our GIS database.
Is the database using the latest software? Or are we back in the 60s?
No, it's the most up to date.
Okay.
Each up to date version or release of I think it's the ESRI program.
Okay.
Which kind of is the language of GIS.
Great. Anybody else?
Does this plan cover, I happen to live west of PCH, and I happen to be in a condominium complex that because of liquid fashion, we can no longer get flood insurance.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Sorry, my phone went off anyway. So anyway, but it was disheartening to me to find out here recently that if we let our existing policy lapse, that we can no longer buy in a policy that we can get anything, flood insurance that's west of PCH, which is pretty scary to me. But so that tells me that there's probably a heightened possibility of flooding because of liquefaction and that close to the ocean. Is there anything particular that now that we know that we have a known hotspot in the city, that is there any specific plan or anything to mitigate that?
Well, all the mitigation associated with hazards, as you know, come to light only with new development, unless we were to advance a additional study to identify existing conditions in great detail. But otherwise, with new development, you'll get your geotechnical, you get your soils, you get your analysis that will then serve, those reports are what begin to build the database in terms of locations for certain soil conditions that we have. So it's how we interface that with development as it comes in. It informs us that we need to require certain studies. So, that's what this is about. This is about kind of getting to where you're referring to ultimately, knowing where all these locations are in the city that have particular soil conditions. And they do have that information. It's just, it only comes to light in pieces as development occurs. And then we can start backfilling our GIS database with layers related to, the soils information, for example. So we're not there yet.
Yeah. Well, if you're doing a risk analysis, I mean, you look at this, and of course, you got the liquefaction, we understand that, but then you also have over 1,600 residents. It's a very high density area between Torrance Boulevard to the south and Beryl to the north. And, it's a very high density area. So if you have to put the two together, it seems like that would merit having a unique plan for the city to be prepared to mitigate and potentially save lives.
Oh, absolutely, and that's what this would help us to do. As we feed with new data, or existing data as it becomes available, this GIS database, it'll tell us where these, let's say, hotspots are, potentials are, that we would have a higher sensitivity towards in terms of, depending on the type of emergency that we were responding to. So, yeah, the information's there. It's just not all collected where we can use it and plan for future issues related to hazard preparedness, because we just don't have it. It's in other databases. It's not here.
Well, I think, you got consequences, you got likelihood, which is high, and the consequences are huge because of the number of people that live in that area. So I don't know if you put those two together, if you come up with a red flag, but I do. I certainly have a concern that, the loss of life could be pretty heavily in that area. So the consequences are so high that it seems like it would merit special attention.
Well, it sounds like to me that this is requiring that under the 2.4, it's requiring there to be that for high occupancy facilities, which would be all those condominiums on that area. So This is sort of requiring, and this again is I think is a policy. It's not
Correct.
specific. And so this is a policy as to requiring the city to have that. This is not actually doing it. It's requiring the city to do that. So that's how I understand this to be read.
Yeah, that's correct. 2.4. Is that what you noted?
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Requiring critical, sensitive, and high occupancy facilities and maintain site-specific emergency response plans. This means that it's requiring it, so it's something that's going to be done. That it's this isn't the plan in here. This is just the policy to require the city to have such a plan. Am I reading that correctly, or am I incorrect in that?
No, that's correct. And there'd be an implementation measure that would go with this that would take it even, convert it even to a more finite, defined action. A certain department, a certain timeline, a budget, things like that. So yeah, that policy would do exactly what Commissioner Hannon is referring to.
Thank you for bringing that up. I actually did not see that, so I feel much more comfortable. Thank you.
So are we good with this then? And the last set, obviously. And then we can move to your seismic and geologic hazards again. Reduce death, injury, property damage, economic and social dislocation, and disruption of vital services resulting from seismic and geologic related events. So that is, that goal speaks exactly to what you were saying, Jim. Current state, of course, new development required to meet seismic safety. Safety element to incorporate relevant geologic and seismic hazard information. High oxygen allows for evacuation of occupants. So yeah, there's some very specific policies here on notification, making individuals aware of what fault may be near them or certain soil condition. And the element actually identifies certain areas of liquefaction, and then they're required to meet a higher standard. Any comment here?
I only see 6 on the screen. Is that right?
Yeah, right.
There's actually 11 to this.
Yes, and here's the next batch. Yeah, that one was so many, I couldn't get them all on one.
Sure. I have a question about 410. Requiring automatic natural gas shutoff earthquake sensors. Don't we already have those, Isaac? Or is that something that we don't have? I figured the fire department would know the answer to that question. Sorry, got you off guard.
Okay, I was more struggling to find my unmute button. But
I have a hard time with that too.
relative to natural gas shutoff earthquake sensors, yeah, those are in place in some residential spaces, but specific to this goal, it's specific to the the building types. So your occupancy types would include high occupancy industrial, commercial facilities. As far as the new homes, those are all being rolled in. But like I said, this is a more comprehensive listing of structure types.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any more comments on seismic and geologic hazards? Okay. Well, moving to the next goal in 2 points, tsunami hazard. Of course, this is a newer, although tsunamis have happened for a long time, newer goal and a couple of policies: protection of life, prevention of injury, and reduction in the potential for property damage from tsunami runout.
Can I ask what type of structures would prevent tsunami damage? Because when I was reading about what the East Coast was doing, it sounded like a federal, multi-state, multi-billion-dollar, decades-long program to put a wall up. And I'm just, when I observed that Santa Cruz had $20 million in damage months ago, and this year they had $6 million in damage. What are these specific measures, Sean, that we're talking about here that are maybe a little bit easier to implement?
I don't have the answer. That's what we would dig into with the implementation program. It would be really define those based on, a lot of factors: distance from coastline, elevation above coastline. There'd be a number of different, let's say, scenarios that would warrant different measures. And I think it's essentially kind of looking at, running models of those potentials and then determining what types of measures would be warranted and what costs would be associated with them. So that'd be an implementation measure for sure, would be to kind of define what those could be, in this particular case. And looking at other examples, other jurisdictions like you referenced, and then looking for funding in a big way.
I mean, as a commission, I would love to pass a motion where we would say, hey, let's look at those measures to protect the coastline, but it would seem like we would need the beach cities and probably our county supervisor and probably more than that to get something going to even protect our city. But it sounds like a massive task to do that, but I was just curious what the list of mid-range solutions would be to reduce damage or improve warning. So this is really interesting to me. Thank you.
Yeah, I think improving warnings is a really huge component. The infrastructure required to prevent, tsunami-related damage. It might not be a full option, but early warning, to get individuals out of the area is really, that's probably, certainly the most cost-effective way to minimize casualties, certainly. And I don't know about property damage. I think that's a different animal, but certainly human life. And that warning system would be really critical.
Do we have like a connection with the Redondo Beach TV that we see on Channel 3 where they will put up, download this app or shake alert and things like that to improve the residential coverage of using those so that people can be warned when there's an issue? Or is that that type of connection kind of a non-starter? It's just, are there ways to market those warning systems and people being aware of them better through signage or local television?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that, our community services department, they are really connected to the community. And a lot of their facilities are actually play a part in local hazard mitigation planning with respect to some of the newer conditions that we're having to deal with, like severe heat. Those will now be cooling locations. So there's a lot more information that through the implementation measures associated with a lot of these policies we'll be getting out, to the public. And Isaac, I don't know, is there anything you want to add to that?
Sure. So the unique thing about tsunamis, typically we have time, to your point, Sean, as far as being able to communicate incoming hazards from the ocean to our shores. That being said, if you look down at 5.2, the Tsunami Warning Center that's based out of Palmer, Alaska, they run a buoy system in the ocean and they get the inundation, the swell of the movement of the water. So that all being said, if we prioritize life, property, environment, certainly we have time to make the warning. So we can do the Everbridge public alerting warning system. We have the ability to utilize just even PAs in emergency vehicles as we move through, say, like the marina, the harbor, moving westbound into the projected inundation zone. We do have evacuation routes, right? We have our east-west routes. We have our high ground spaces. We move towards above ground elevations that are to the best benefit to kind of avoid the inundation component of a tidal wave, tsunami type movement of water. So there are definitely things that we've discussed in terms of the public safety component of the early response component, as far as public notification and moving people out of, like I said, the projected inundation zone. So there are, like I said, Everbridge, there are PA systems, there's the cable network. There are certainly ways that we can reach out to the community at large. But again, the unique component about tsunamis, typically there is a time to a projection window to when that water movement arrives.
Yeah.
Thanks. Does anybody have any other comments on this page?
Doesn't look like it. All righty, we'll move on to goal SF6, flood hazards, protection of life, prevention of injury, and reduction in the potential for property damage from flooding. Again, I think the city just went through a update to the maps. There was an effort from FEMA that funded some updates and additional information. So I think that just went through a process in our public works department that updated the FEMA flood hazard zones 100 and 500 year. And there's a exhibit in the safety element with this information. And those, they get fairly regularly updated as some conditions change with increase in rainfall and short-term rainfall, intensity increases of the rainfall, and the continued development creates more impervious surfaces. So you get faster moving water, more water. So, the profile of the floods are changing a little bit as we move into these, climate related issues. And this set of policies aims to, keep this high on the list and manage these areas and make sure we're aware of the potential in these locations. So, and make sure we're not putting any, let's say, critical facilities, in or adjacent to, what we know to be a potential flood area. And we know down in the marina, we've got some things like that. So, we want to shore those up and, make sure we're dealing with the mapped flood hazards. And that's what these policies are aiming to do.
It's interesting that they had a flood back in the 19th century that wrecked like 1/4 of the California economy. And I think the flood plain was from like Los Alamitos to Seal Beach or something like that. It was really awful. So I guess water can come from anywhere. The way climate change is going, we all seem to think it's going to be a tsunami, but it does rain from time to time in California. And this is really good stuff. Does anybody have a comment on any of these 1 through 5?
No, but I will say we just had hail last week, Wednesday, which was crazy. The second time only since I've lived here, but yeah.
Yeah, it's some dynamic weather. Definitely changing. I grew up here and I remember long and storms, that came and would rain for 3-4 days, but I don't know, now you get almost as much rainfall in a 3-hour rainstorm. The intensity is just different.
86, yeah, something like that. Yeah, I know what you're talking about with the several days of rain. Yeah.
Yeah, the storm tracks would just kind of roll through now. It doesn't seem like we get those patterns. It's a different, it's this atmospheric river condition that collects a lot more moisture and dumps it over a much shorter period of time. So it's a lot of changes. Okay. Okay, so goal SF7, sea level rise. A resilient and thriving community safeguarded and adaptively managing for rising sea levels. And this is a number of policies that's also being mapped and estimated. Yeah, and there's another exhibit in the safety element that identifies the potential for sea level rise. Certainly, this will be, under the microscope in the events of some future, the next waterfront project, whatever it may be, whatever development occurs down there. These changing sea level elevations have to be incorporated into the design of any new structures down there. Something I haven't mentioned, actually, the safety element now, this has to be updated every 8 years. It's the calendar for updates is, there didn't used to be a requirement. Now it has to be updated every time we update our housing element. So this is something this commission is going to see, going forward, on a much more regular basis.
I don't think I'll be at the next meeting if it's every 8 years, though, Sean.
Yeah, might be different commissioners, but.
Yeah, I will have termed out too, so you won't see me.
We can talk about it on the golf course after the meeting, though.
Yeah.
Sean, will future plans include not just the identification of potential issues, but also mitigation measures?
Yeah, absolutely. That also with the local hazard mitigation plan, there's a lot of, as the title intends, there's a lot of mitigation. That has to be updated, I want to say, every 5 years now. These things are, they're going to be continuous efforts. And then along with this, there's a whole bunch of implementation measures for each one of these policies. There has to be at least one implementation measure for each one of these policies. So it's almost like you read the policy and it's direction, and then the implementation measure is actually putting it into action.
Does that include flotation devices for everybody in Redondo?
How about an implementation measure for the pier to make it more rugged or resistant because it's, made of, would you have to increase concrete underneath the wood structure there? I mean, how would you make that piece of architecture more resilient?
Yeah, it would be, a concrete pier footings, that I know our public works department, they're constantly monitoring and managing the upkeep of the pier.
Wow.
Facilities. I mean, that's happening on a daily basis. The weather, the seawater, that, the maintenance required of those facilities is just incredible. And,
Wow.
the costs continue to go up, but, that a much more long-term would be something, a concrete facility, but, funding for that, I don't know where that even comes from at this point, but it could be related to some, upgrades through federal funding related to sea level rise. There are going to be opportunities, certainly. And this having to visit this so frequently and with direct policies and implementation measures that speak to that, it won't be for lack of trying.
Sounds like you should put in your plan somewhere that you need to hire a grant application specialist and put them on commission or something and give them a quota to get as much funding as possible. Because sounds like you got your work cut out for you. On this one.
No, I know it. That's not a bad program. I'm sure it'll find its way into some of the implementation measures for a couple of the elements we're updating now. So you'd think that has a potential to fund itself, right? Like you said, there could be contracts out there for grant acquisition specialists and firms that, we don't, they just get some component of the grant, if allowed, and then nothing comes out of our pocket. I don't know the details, but we're getting a new waterfront economic development director that deals a lot with grant funding, and I think would probably be bringing some expertise and manpower to that issue, hopefully.
Any other questions?
Okay. And hazardous materials, goal SF8, the adequate management, transportation, storage, and disposal of hazardous materials in Redondo Beach. So this comes up quite a bit actually with development, as it occurs. And all sites are required. We can't even take in an application without making a cross check of hazardous materials locations and sites documented by multiple different state agencies. They all feed into this database, and we have to check that before we can deem an application complete for development. Because and Redondo, like many cities, in this region, had a lot of old oil, a lot of industry. And so the hazardous materials are definitely out there and have to be mitigated, as we go forward. And so this has a lot of policies and, aimed at, getting, making sure we're cleaning up as we go forward and, making sure that we don't use a lot. I think the amount of groundwater we use is I think between 1% and 2% from local groundwater sources, but that's 1% to 2% that's mixed in with the overall water that we receive from Colorado and State Water Project, Northern California. So it's you got to make sure we're keeping what little water we do get out of our own groundwater sources to be clean. So there's a lot of effort that goes into this.
I just want to say it was interesting to note that I was looking at the table 9.2, and they were talking about there was a couple cleaners, looked like dry cleaners that were under evaluation, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, those are notoriously polluting industry. They were much more before than they are now, but just the chemicals that they use are extremely toxic and very, they have a propensity to get into the soil and find their way, to the water table. Just it's the nature of the chemicals. So there's quite a few. You can almost bet when a site turns up, when we do a search, it was a dry cleaner that was next door or something. It's almost, you can almost bet on it. Any other comments on the hazardous materials? Okay. Moving along to Sf9 Fire Hazards. Isaac, I'll let you take this one.
This really talks more about the wildland urban interface relative to the state. Minimize risk of injuries, property damage, economic loss due to fire emergencies. If you peruse through here, certainly there are some municipal components to the fire hazard element, but certainly take your time to peruse through and I'll happily answer whatever resulting questions you may have.
Yeah, a lot of the impetus for the new regulations that address fire hazards, Isaac was referring to, are springing from the wildfires, that happen in the more rural areas where they've become much more developed, and you've got, people moving out further into these what traditionally were wild areas that didn't have anybody living in them, and now they're extremely hazardous conditions. So there's just been a ton of laws that are coming down related to fire hazards and how they have to be addressed in the safety element. They're not as applicable to us generally, but there's still plenty here that we need to continue to work on. Anything else on this one? Okay. All right, this is our last goal, SF10, additional climate change hazards. Again, this is, a new iteration required in safety elements having to do with climate change hazards. So the goal reads, a resilient community able to adapt to climate change hazards. So these are a number of policies that advance that goal. As we just, a lot more data is coming out. We're having to retain the data, map the data, and look at things that didn't used to be classified as a hazard, like severe heat and drought conditions. They're just so much more common now. So it's there's a lot of I think the city's also looking at a tree preservation ordinance, and a lot of the impetus for that is reducing the heat island from not having shade. And there's some policies that speak to that in here as well. All right. Any comment on this last batch?
I have a question.
Yes.
Number 7, it says, as part of cooling strategies and stormwater runoff reduction in public and private spaces. Is it stormwater runoff reduction or stormwater runoff collection?
Which one is that?
SF 10.7.
Promote and expand use as part of cooling strategies and stormwater runoff reduction in public and yeah, it's about reduction. And you know what that does, the way you reduce that stormwater runoff is create more pervious surfaces.
I got it.
So you get you get more landscaping, and you'll get the less paved surface you have, that serves as a stormwater runoff reduction measure.
Is there any interest in stormwater runoff collection?
Yeah, that certainly, when you do that, you're recharging your aquifer. So I think just by, having, and a lot of our developments now, they're actually, there's requirements for stormwater mitigation, where you have to treat the first 3/4 of an inch of rainfall from a storm event on site. So you have to collect it. So you do have to collect it and retain it on site. And it's usually done in some kind of a borehole that they'll drain into, and that'll perk into the ground. Or they'll have a landscaped area that's kind of hollowed out that they'll dump the on-site drainage into. So you get that first flush is where a lot of the pollutants are. And then that goes into that landscaped area and perks out and cleans itself. So the retention, it definitely is handled through they're called the NPDES, National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, and the Stormwater Urban Management Plan requirements. And we call them here in Redondo Beach, we call them LID, low impact development. So everything that comes in west of PCH right now is required to provide a LID, a new application, and for development. And so as part of that, that's how they design that stormwater runoff to be retained the first 3/4 inch and before it's allowed to leave the property. So I think I want to say in open space conservation, we've got a policy where we're trying to just do that citywide. We do it for some types of development citywide, but our goal is to do that for all different project types citywide. So we retain it and we reduce it.
Okay, and then does that have a place anywhere in these goals, what you just mentioned?
We already have an ordinance for that. So it's, that, and I'm sure there's, policies in this element, in the other, certainly in our open space and conservation element, our land use element, that'll have some implementation measures that kind of overlap and deal with these issues. So, it's this, the planning effort, and policy documents are becoming pretty rigorous now, more so than ever. So yeah, we're already handling a lot of what you're referring to, and I'm almost positive we've got a land use or an open space and conservation policy that's asking for some stormwater management as well.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So let me move to I've just got this slide. That's basically just next steps. So following tonight's public meeting of the Public Safety Commission, the draft safety element, along with any comments and recommendations. So far, we just had the one. Will be forwarded. We're going to bring it back to the General Plan Advisory Committee, more as an informational purpose for them, but they'll get the minutes from this meeting. We'll present to them, a quick summary of what went on here. And then we're looking to do that probably spring, summer of 2022. And then we have the Planning Commission early 2023.
Welcome.
And the city council, early 2023. That's our current schedule. The reason it's drawn out so much is because the update to the general plan, including the safety element update, is going to require the development and review and approval of an environmental impact report. And we can't get going on that until we get our land use plan nailed down, which is right now sitting in our housing element being reviewed by HCD up at the state. And if we can get them on board with what we're proposing in terms of land use changes, then we can take the safety element and the open space and conservation element and the land use element and run that through the environmental impact report process. So that's why it's kicking. It's, not until 2023 that we're going to be able to take the safety element, this draft element, to the Planning Commission and City Council for the formal hearing process. And with that, this is our recommendation, that take any public testimony if any's come in. And then, we can, if you could make a recommendation and a determination on the safety element, then we'll be done. So I can turn it over to you, Chair.
So you're wanting us to make a recommendation and deciding on this with the changes as made?
Yes.
Okay. I think it looks good. I like the
motion
policy.
for that. Yeah,
I had more questions
sure.
Oh,
or comments, if that's appropriate. Yeah.
absolutely.
Go ahead. Yeah. So one of the first things that you showed us was the red lines, the changes, and I received them earlier, I think today or yesterday, and I reviewed them. And one was the emergency center. It's in the police station, and then the other center, the backup, I assume, was the fire department. And then you moved that to the second floor of the library, but it's on the same city block. Do you really want to co-locate them so close together?
That's just where they are now. What do you think, Isaac? Is there?
Sure. So the immediate functionality of the EOC and the police department is plug and play. It is dedicated and it is immediately utilized. It is a smaller space, and if the capacity of that initial EOC is enough to serve the needs of the incident, then it'll open and close in that EOC. But if the nature of the incident becomes more expansive, whether by scale or time, then we can move up into the library facility. The library facility EOC is more modular and it can be built out. So it's really like a transfer based on the magnitude of the incident and then the management need of the incident. So relative to the space, I understand that there is maybe some consideration as far as the closeness of it, but it's really the functionality of it. It's the initial EOC as it needs to be expanded moves into the secondary EOC at the library. So the locality actually helps that transition. And that was part of the consideration as we evolved it and moved it to the library facility.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask if you would consider a larger geographic separation between the two.
Sure, that's always something that we can explore for future implementation, absolutely.
Or, what I would add on what Commissioner Kleinbaum said is maybe an alternative. So in case the fact that the library and the police station are not functional, if there's some sort of catastrophic, then there should be something at a different part of the end of Redondo Beach that we can set up, or that can be set up as a command center.
Right.
Like maybe a backup plans for.
Right, absolutely. The City Hall complex does have emergency generators for the sake of powering the spaces. I know the PD for sure, and then the library has a high capacity generator. But to your point, I do understand, like say maybe some seismic activity, would preclude the City Hall complex from being used. Absolutely, there are alternate sites that we could implement. But yeah, certainly your concerns are definitely noted.
Okay. And then I had another one about the goals on there. Maybe it's just the nature of these goals. They're supposed to be the subjective, and so you have all these like good words. But later in the future, you want to measure how well you've met these goals. And it's when you want to measure something, if you have objective goals, it's easier to measure them than subjective goals. Is it possible to throw in some items some things that are more objective, so it's not so subjective, so you can measure it later, so you can see if you've met them and how well you're performing, and if you want to improve later, you have some point of reference, some benchmark.
Measurable.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I'm looking at some policy examples. You know, the nature of the document is, it is, you know, very high level and broadly written. That next phase, and this is something, you know, and I'd be happy to bring it back, the implementation measures. That's where, you know, the level of detail you're referring to is required to be attached as an appendix to this document.
Okay.
I did make a little note on the strategic efforts regarding the 2 EOCs. Additionally, an alternative location has a further backup, you know, could or should be, could be planned, something, and we can clean that language up, but I want you to know I made a note of that, so that, you know, that makes sense. There could be a need for, you know, because they're in such close proximity. I mean, I definitely see what Isaac's saying. I mean, that's, you know, you want it to be close. It's by design. You know, you can move right quickly and easily to expand that facility, and, you know, physically run back and forth if you needed to. And then, but, you know, what if the disaster is of a nature that, you know, both you know, they're right next to each other. You know, they're kind of susceptible to the same thing. So having another spot, you know, kind of picked out, you know, is something we can make a note of here.
Yeah, so in addition to fixed facilities, I know that there are also, we do have access to mobile command trailers. So that would be like supremely effective in terms of being able to relocate on the move. So there is that option as well. So truly any public assembly type space that would allow us a space to assemble a staff to initiate the coordination, logistics, and operational needs of an incident would certainly be able to be utilized. That being said, a lot of the hardware that we use at the secondary EOC, because it is modular, we can take the equipment, the computers, the laptops, the office supplies, and that is highly mobile. So those are considerations too.
Excellent.
Can I hear a motion for satisfying all the edits the commission wants to make, or does anybody have any additional questions?
I would make that motion if there's no more questions.
I can second the motion.
Officer Lostrom.
My time to shine. Commissioner Hannon,
Aye.
Commissioner Coig,
Aye.
Commissioner Kleinbaum,
Aye.
and Commissioner Gall.
Aye.
All right. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Sean.
No,
Yeah, thank you,
you're
Sean.
You're very welcome. This was really productive. Thanks for all the questions and the, additional information we're going to put in here. This will be a good step, a great step. And I'll probably stay in touch with Kyle. When we come up with the implementation measures, at a minimum, I'll get them to your body and, so you guys can take a look at them. And then we can figure out if we want to have another meeting or not on that. All right. Thank you so
Sounds good.
much.
Thank you.
Thank
All right.
you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Do I hear a motion to close?
Adjourn.
Yeah, adjourn, or do we need to go to member items and referrals to staff?
Oh, maybe that. I have done, if you were asking me.
Okay.
Other than the fact that, again, the city attorney and the prosecutor's office has not shown up at one of our meetings. So hopefully they'll come to the next meeting. Maybe. I know.
I did make that phone call today, and I left a note with Mr. Webb's admin. So understood.
Susan,
Yeah.
are you referring to January 31st?
Yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Kleinbaum, anything?
No. I think we're-
Commissioner Hannon?
No, sir.
Next meeting is March 21st, Monday at 7 p.m. I will try to get LAHSA and our supervisor in as panelists or members of her team. And I would like to call this meeting adjourned.
Chair, if I could real quick,
Sure.
I will create a discussion item, separate discussion item for the panelists from last, if that gets confirmed.
You got it, LASA, and also supervisor's office as well.
And then if they have any materials, if they could just get it to me ahead of time. Usually I prepare the agenda the Thursday prior, so that's the 17th. So if they could get any materials they would present with, if it's just going to be conversational, then that's not an issue. But if they have materials prior to the 17th is the easiest for getting it on the agenda.
Understood. Yeah, before we all get to partying on St. Patrick's Day, I'll try to get that done.
Otherwise, I'm good.
I call this meeting adjourned. Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good evening.